It started as a routine visit. As a home care nurse, I had been assigned to a new patient. Mr. Aaron Blake, he was a retired school teacher in his late 50s, who had recently undergone knee replacement surgery. The moment I stepped into his modest, well-kept home, I noticed the warmth in his demeanor. Despite his visible discomfort, Aaron greeted me with a genuine smile. "I suppose you're the new nurse they mentioned," he said, shifting uncomfortably in his recliner. "Yes, I'm Emily," I replied, setting my bag down on the coffee table. "I'll be taking care of you for the next few weeks." Aaron nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's good to have some company around here. My kids live out of state and this place can get lonely." His honesty caught me off guard. Most patients didn't open up so quickly, but something about Aaron felt different. Over the next few days, we established a routine. I would arrive in the mornings to assist him with his physical therapy exercises, ensure he took his medications, and prepare simple meals before leaving in the afternoon. Aaron had a sharp wit and a knack for storytelling, often regaling me with tales from his years as a teacher. One day, after completing his therapy session, Aaron sighed and looked out the window. "You know, Emily, there's something about being confined like this that makes you reflect on your life. I've made mistakes, big ones, but I've also had my share of joy." I hesitated, unsure if I should pry. "Do you regret anything?" He chuckled softly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Oh, plenty. But regrets are funny things. They can consume you if you let them." There was a vulnerability in his words that stirred something in me. I found myself sharing more about my own life during our conversations. My struggles as a single mother, my fears of never being enough, and my dreams of going back to school. Aaron listened intently, offering advice that felt more like gentle nudges than lectures. As the days turned into weeks, our bond deepened. I noticed little things: how he'd wait for my arrival by the window, how he'd offer to help with small tasks despite his limited mobility, and how his story seems to shift from the past to the present, focusing more on our time together. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the kitchen, Aaron called out from the living room, "Emily, can you come here for a moment?" I walked over, drying my hands on a towel. "What's up?" He held up an old photo album. "I wanted to show you something." Curiosity piqued. I sat beside him as he flipped through the pages. The photos chronicled his life, from his younger days as a teacher to family vacations and moments with his late wife. His voice softened as he spoke about her, and I could see the depth of his love and loss. "I haven't shown this to anyone in years," he admitted, glancing at me. "But I felt like you'd understand." In that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but there was an unspoken connection that neither of us acknowledged aloud. After that day with the photo album, my visits to Aaron's home felt different. There was an unspoken familiarity between us, as though we'd known each other for years rather than weeks. I found myself lingering longer than necessary, chatting about everything from books to life philosophies, laughing over his dry humor, and even indulging in cups of tea that he insisted on brewing himself, despite his slow movements. One particularly stormy afternoon, I arrived to find Aaron struggling with a broken heater. The house was chilly, and his hands trembled slightly as he tried to tighten a loose valve. "Let me help with that," I said, setting my bag aside and kneeling to inspect the heater. Aaron sighed, shaking his head. "You're too kind, Emily. You do enough for me already. Fixing this is part of the job description." I joked, though it wasn't. I didn't mind going beyond my duties for him. There was something about Aaron that made me want to ease his burdens. As I worked, Aaron stood nearby, watching me intently. His gaze wasn't intrusive, but it carried a weight that I couldn't quite place. "You're a remarkable woman," he said suddenly. I froze my hands, still gripping the wrench. What makes you say that most people treat me like a patient? A problem to be solved, but you treat me like a person. I can't tell you how much that means to me. His words hit me harder than I expected. I forced a smile, brushing it off lightly. Well, you make it easy. You're one of the good ones, Aaron. The heater finally sputtered to life, filling the room with warmth. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag, and noticed that Aaron was still watching me, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," he said softly. "It's nothing," I replied, though we both knew it wasn't. That evening, as I packed up to leave, the storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance. Aaron frowned, glancing outside. "Maybe you should stay until it clears up," he suggested. I hesitated. "I don't want to impose." "You wouldn't be. Besides, it's not safe out there right now." "Against my better judgment," I agreed. Aaron brewed another pot of tea and we settled into the living room. The atmosphere was cozy, the storm outside only amplifying the warmth inside. As we talked, our conversations grew more personal. Aaron opened up about his struggles with loneliness. Since his wife passed away, the guilt he felt for not being more present for his children, and his fear of becoming a burden. In turn, I shared my fears of failing my son, and my lingering doubts about my career. At one point, he reached over and placed a hand on mine. "Emily, you're doing more than you realize for me." "For your son, for yourself. Don't ever doubt that." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. My heart raced, though I wasn't sure why. I pulled my hand away, gently smiling to mask the mix of emotions swirling inside me. "Thank you, Aaron. That means a lot," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. As the rain continued to pour outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something unspoken, something neither of us dared to name. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside, fresh and glistening under the early sunlight. I woke up early, determined to leave, before the weight of the previous night's conversation settled into something neither Aaron nor I could handle as I packed my things and prepared to head home. Aaron greeted me in the kitchen. He was already dressed, leaning on his cane as he brewed a pot of coffee. "Morning," he said, his tone warm but cautious. "Morning," I replied, avoiding his gaze. The silence between us felt heavier than usual, the unspoken tension from the night before lingering like a shadow. Aaron poured 2 cups of coffee, then slid one across the counter toward me. "Are we okay, Emily?" he asked after a moment, his voice soft. I looked up at him, forcing a smile. "Of course we're fine." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Something had changed, and we both felt it. As I sat at the counter, sipping my coffee, Aaron spoke again. "I've been thinking about what I said last night. I want you to know I didn't mean to make things complicated. You've been so kind to me, and I would never want to put you in a difficult position." I set my cup down, meeting his gaze. "Aaron, I appreciate your honesty. And I care about you too, more than I probably should. But we both know this can't go any further. It wouldn't be fair to either of us." He nodded, his expression pained, but understanding. "You're right, you're absolutely right." For a moment, we simply sat there, 2 people connected by something profound yet impossible. Then Aaron smiled, a genuine, warm smile that eased some of the tension between us. "Thank you for everything, Emily," he said. "You've made this chapter of my life brighter than I ever thought it could be." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. "You've helped me too, Aaron. More than you know." After finishing our coffee, I gathered my things and prepared to leave. Aaron walked me to the door, leaning heavily on his cane. As I stepped outside, he called out to me one last time. "Emily, don't ever doubt how much you matter to your son, to your patients, to the world. You're extraordinary." I turned back, smiling through the lump in my throat. "Take care of yourself, Aaron. And don't forget to do your exercises." He laughed softly, nodding. "I'll try." As I drove away, I felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, sadness, and relief. What had happened between Aaron and me was real, but it wasn't meant to be anything more. Our connection had been a brief but meaningful intersection of two lives, reminding us both of what it meant to feel seen and valued. For weeks afterward, I thought about Aaron, wondering if he was doing his exercises, if he was finding joy in the little things, and if he missed our conversations as much as I did. But I knew I had made the right choice in walking away, keeping our bond intact without letting it cross into something it shouldn't be. And in the end, that was enough. That was the storm lasted longer than either of us expected. And by the time the rain eased, night had fully set in. Aaron suggested I stay the night, insisting he had a guest room that was rarely used, but perfectly comfortable. "It's safer than driving back in this weather," he reasoned. "And I'd feel better, knowing you're not out there on those slippery roads." His concern felt genuine, and though I hesitated, the idea of navigating dark, rain-soaked streets didn't appeal to me. "All right," I agreed. "But just for tonight." Aaron smiled, a mixture of relief and something I couldn't quite place in his expression. He showed me to the guest room, which was simple but cozy, with a neatly made bed and a small window overlooking the garden. "Thank you," I said, as he lingered in the doorway. "Good night, Emily," he replied softly before retreating to his own room. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, replaying our conversations and the way he had looked at me earlier. There was nothing inappropriate about his behavior, yet there was a closeness forming between us that felt complicated. Around midnight, I got up to get a glass of water. The house was quiet, safe for the faint hum of the heater I had fixed earlier. As I passed by the living room, I saw a light on. Aaron was there, sitting on the couch with a book in hand. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Looking up, I shook my head. Too much on my mind, I guess. "Join me," he offered, gesturing to the seat beside him. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down. He closed the book, setting it aside, and turned to face me. "Emily, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, though my heart raced in anticipation. "Do you ever feel like life gives you a second chance, when you least expect it?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wasn't sure how to answer, so I simply nodded. "I feel like that's what's happened since you came into my life." He admitted. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "Aaron," I began, unsure of what to say. "You've reminded me of things I thought I'd forgotten: hope, connection, even happiness," he continued. "And I know I shouldn't say this, but I have to. You're more than just a nurse to me. You've become important." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air charged with an intensity neither of us knew how to navigate. I looked down at my hands, unable to meet his gaze. "You're important to me too," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "But this, whatever this is, we have to be careful." Aaron nodded, his expression a mix of understanding and regret. "I know, I just needed you to know how I feel. You've brought light back into my life, Emily, and for that I'll always be grateful." We sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken tension between us palpable. Then I stood, forcing a small smile. "Good night, Aaron." "Good night, Emily," he replied, his voice laced with unspoken emotions. As I walked back to the guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed an invisible line, one that neither of us had intended to, but neither of us had the will to step back from entirely.